I see a lot of people in my practice struggling with the idea of whether or not we have free will or if everything's fated. And honestly, it's not really something that I struggle with anymore, or that takes up a lot of my brain space because I see it as both. I really believe that it's both. In the same way that light is both a particle and a wave, we are both free and fated. And today I kind of want to walk you through how I understand this, starting with the philosophy first, but then getting into why astrology might be a useful tool to help us navigate this part of life. So starting with the philosophy, there's really three essential thoughts around this topic. Starting with free will, which is basically that everything is your own choice. Your reality is completely made up by all of your choices. And then there's determinism, which is basically the idea that everything is fated. There's no free will. No matter how much free will you think you got, fate knew you were about to do that. And then we have compatibilism, which is where they just try to fit them together. Yes, everything's a little bit fated. Yes, everything's a little bit free will. You know, they somehow they're coexisting. That's pretty much exactly where I land. I mean, I see it kind of like a mathematical equation. The relationship between the variables is always the same, but the variables that you input, those are your choices, and those determine the output. So yes, the solution is always the solution to those variables in that particular order. That's your fate. But the inputs are the free will. Does that make sense? Makes a lot of sense to me. Maybe I'll visualize it. The structure is the fate, but the inputs are free will. Okay, so let's look at it like a bell curve. These realities are the outputs of the inputs that you made comfortably, instinctually, or without a lot of awareness. But these over here, these are the ones that were radical changes, radical choices. They went against everything that was programmed within you. And then, within these, there's their own little bell curves. Because now, this is almost null, because now you're living in this realm. Everything is zoomed in to over here. This is now your new probabilities. Down here. And this is kind of where you get into quantum leaping. Quantum leaping. You might not like that term, but that's the language that we have. But it's changing your reality, changing your fate based on making choices that are outside of your realm of possibilities and giving you way more possibilities. However, this is where I still see that as fate. This was still here the whole time. You just wasn't zooming in on it. The answers were the answers the whole time. You just weren't solving for those problems. You feel me? This is kind of where it gets a little bit more uncomfortable because we're talking about harsh truths. There are situations in which people have a hard time accepting their role in whatever they went through. But it's essential in your healing process that you recognize where there were boundaries that were not real boundaries, so that they cannot bound you again. We have situations where we feel like there's no options, but they're just deeply uncomfortable options. And that's kind of like this part of your bell curve. Everything in you is telling you to stay in that familiar region, but if you go over here, your leaps will be bounds. Your bounds will be leaped, whatever they say. So yeah, we have situations where we feel like we have no options, but we did. Which leaves us feeling like these were fated situations. And in a way they were, because they were rooted in things that you were always going to struggle with. We'll get back to the astrology of it later. But there was choice, it was just constrained by limiting beliefs. Situations like staying in abusive relationships or giving years to a job that you knew didn't care about you and then you get laid off. Having a child with somebody who had already proven to be unreliable before the child. And in those moments, we tell ourselves that we have no option. And I understand why, because the alternative felt impossible. Leaving felt scarier than staying. The unknown feels more dangerous than the known pain. But that's not fate overriding free will. That's free will constrained by fear, by conditioning, by limiting beliefs about what we deserve or what we're capable of surviving. And this is hard to accept because it means we have to hold both truths at once. Yes, you were constrained by emotional or financial limitations, and you also had agency within those constraints. You made the best choices that you could see at the time with the awareness that you had. And that's the paradox again. You were both limited and choosing. But ultimately, this line of thinking isn't complicated. It just requires accepting paradox. That two things can be true at one time. And this is kind of where astrology comes in, because it gives us a framework or a toolkit or an awareness of the things that might cause you to stay somewhere or cause you to have these limiting beliefs, or the things that you struggle with. It gives you an outline. So now I kind of want to help you understand where astrology fits into all of this, because your birth chart applies at all of the different levels. It applies on your fated things, your big things that are going to happen to you, and it also applies in those day-to-day matters where you're making your choices. Your whole chart is your fate, but it's also all of your options. It shows what you can achieve inside your comfort zone and what you can achieve outside of it. So it shows you the energetic framework or the structure that you're working within, but it also shows you where you'll have to make uncomfortable choices if you want to evolve. I'll show you what I mean with my own chart. A little bit of it. I'm only showing you the opposition. That's my business. So I have Mars in my first house in Scorpio, opposite Jupiter in my 7th house in Taurus. And this represents a core struggle that I've had in my life, which is the actions that I do for myself, by myself, to express myself, versus the security that I receive from being in closeness with another person, often codependently. So for the first quarter of my life, I spent most of my time in my 7th chart. I was craving security through these one-on-one relationships. And that's where I spent so much of my time. I was looking for a husband. I was looking for a boyfriend, always trying to make sure that I was going to have the job lined up. I could be a stay-at-home mom, take care of my kids, have my little nuclear family. I had almost no sense of self. That always came second to making sure that my partner and I were secure. Was that fated? Yes. That opposition was built into my birth chart. That energy was always going to be there. Did I have to express it codependently? No. That choice came from limiting beliefs. Beliefs that I wasn't good enough on my own, or that my worth came from being needed. Fast forward to the second quarter of my life, and I'm finding the opposite. I recognize this as a problem, and now I'm struggling to maintain closeness with other people. I want to spend all of my time focused on myself and building myself, learning about myself, developing myself. Same opposition, different expression. And here's the big key that we get with our toolkit. The ability to accept and move on. This is something that I've struggled with in the past. This is how it affected me. I'm moving forward, not trying to be like that again. That's awareness, baby. You have to accept that this is a part of you, that this is something that you do struggle with, and you will probably or maybe continue to struggle with, and that's okay. And then you can work on trying to balance it. So for me, instead of spending 2 weeks in independence and then 2 weeks in codependence and 2 weeks in independence, saying, whoa, slow down, you're doing that thing again, and then trying to find the middle. And because this is an applying aspect, this is something that I will see at many layers of my life. I will solve the problem here, and the universe will represent it in a new way. Another level for me to conquer that challenge. Something that's challenging in your chart can be perceived as bad fortune if you don't see it as an opportunity to learn, or if you don't learn how to work with it. You'll keep making the same constrained choices, feeling like you have no options, and blaming fate. But if you accept the challenge and you allow yourself to be transformed by it, you'll discover a new version of yourself on the other side. And then you get exposed to that same tension, but on a new level. Or if it's separating, eventually it just simmers out and you've conquered it. My sort of level 1 with my Mars-Jupiter opposition was the fact that Mars is in my first house, and I do appear masculinely. I appear intensely. I appear very manly. And I didn't like that as a woman. As a woman, that sucked. As a woman trying to be in relationship with men, that sucked. And I had to overcome that. Or it could have just been something that I struggled with for the rest of my life. Only validating myself through relationships. And that would have felt fated. It would have felt like I was just never finding the right person for me. Nobody's ever going to accept me for who I truly am. Nobody's ever gonna know who I truly am, not even me. But it was really just constrained by limiting beliefs. The idea that no one's ever gonna love me if I look masculinely. That I'm not actually masculine, I'm just a girl's girl. I'm just a girl. And here I am today in my fullest expression. Bitch, non-binary Betty. Non-binary Betty. Mask Betty. Femme sometimes, bitch. Androgynous Betty. Anyways, back to what I was saying. I accepted that part of myself. I learned from that part of myself. And guess what? Now I'm met with new obstacles related to that placement. And I probably will. Again and again. That's the spiral of growth. Let me talk about transits for a minute. Because this is where fate and choice really collide. And kind of where astrology can illuminate this little dance that they do. A transit doesn't necessarily point to one specific destined event in your life story. It's all energy. So a transit might suggest the loss or the death of something, but based on the inputs that you've put in so far, that energy could translate differently across your wave. So if you're a particle here, and you know, you've got kids, you've got a wife, you've got the whole shebang, and it's talking about loss, and it hits you, and boom, you lose a kid. And let's say it's in your 5th house, boom, you lose a kid. Damn. Let's say you never had kids, though. Down here in your wave, you never had kids. That destined event, that destined energy of loss could look like the loss of a painting that you spent 6 months working on. Let's say you're an artist in this life. 6 months working on. You fucking blood, sweat, and tears. And then it like burns in a house fire. You know, like just that energetic great loss, the feeling, and then the transformation that comes from it. The transit is fated, but the specific manifestation is influenced by your choices. And within that manifestation, you still have choices. Do you grieve and grow? Do you wallow and die? Do you stay stuck, telling yourself that you had no options? Do you allow this loss to play out for the rest of your life, to echo through everything else that you do for the rest of your life? That's a choice, and maybe a statistically likely one. So when somebody asks me, do we have free will or is everything fated? Yes. Yes. The structure is set. The challenges are indicated, but the variables, your choices, your awareness, your willingness to face uncomfortable options and transform, those shape the outcome. You are both the particle and the wave. And by allowing both things to exist at the same time, we're not falling victim to the idea that we are completely helpless or that everything is our fault. We see the truth, that we are working within a framework, but we have agency within that framework. But hey, what do I know? What do I know? Or what do you think? Have you ever been in a situation like that? What was the outcome? Did you ever look back and realize, oh, maybe I had more choices than I thought? It's usually hindsight. It's usually hindsight. And that's what's awesome is if you can think with hindsight, if you can think a little bit like, how am I going to look back at this one day? That can help a little bit. But yeah, comment below, like the video, subscribe. Tell me I'm hot in the comments because look at me and my necklaces and how cool I am. And okay, I'm getting self-centered. I gotta go. Bye.